Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Now it's been almost a month that there has been a relentless and disproportionate Israeli bombardment on the Gaza Strip, resulting in the killing of over 10,000 innocent civilians in Gaza, including over 4,000 innocent children. These are the statistics which have been shared by the Gaza's health ministry. Now, there have been a lot of developments regarding this particular front. The pressing issue the world is faced with, this particular Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as a result of which these casualties, which I have already put forth in front of you. Now, there has been a second tour of the United States Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken, to the Middle East. He had meetings with the top leadership of various countries, also had a meeting with the President of Palestine, Mr. Mehmood Abbas. He requested Secretary of State, Mr. Antony Blinken, for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire as far as the conflict in Gaza is concerned, but that was outrightly rejected by Secretary of State Mr. Antony Blinken also. Now, when we specifically talk about how this particular conflict has been covered by especially the Western media, we'll be trying to take an analysis regarding how the information regarding this conflict has been disseminated when it comes to the objectivity of the flow of information, when it comes to the role and the responsibility of the mainstream media, especially associated with the Western nations. Now, as we speak, there has been condemnation regarding the coverage of the Western mainstream media of this particular conflict. Like Palestinian Journalistic Syndicate, that is a union of Palestinian journalists, has condemned Western media for perpetuating lies and propaganda and also facilitating genocide. Now, what it basically said, let me quote one of its statements, that shorn of any pretense of objectivity or truth, some Western media organizations parroted Israeli government talking points, failed to challenge or even attempt to verify blatant misinformation and propaganda, and adopted dehumanizing and violent language about the Palestinian people, unquote. Likewise, we have seen the journalists who've been covering this particular conflict had been also equally under fire. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, which says the killing of journalists in Israel's siege of Gaza has been unprecedented, as 35 journalists, including 30 of the Palestinian origin, have been killed so far. Has Western media's coverage regarding this particular conflict been asymmetric, unbiased, or what had been the main contour or the hallmark of this particular coverage of the Western media? And were there any alternative voices, and how basically they affected the public opinion globally? We'll be trying to take the analysis and understanding regarding basically the role of media from both the sides. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Jawad Siddiqui, senior journalist. Mr. Jawad, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are being joined by Dr. Amna Mehmood, expert international relations. Dr. Amna, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On Skype from Germany, we are being joined by Mr. Harley, Schlanger, political analyst. Mr. Harley, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Okay, let me start the discussion with you, Mr. Jawad. Now, when it comes to the symmetry and the asymmetry, as we have seen the kind of scale and the proportion of the damage and the destruction that has been continuously reported out from Gaza by the unbiased media, do you see any sort of objectivity that's been carried along by the Western mainstream media when it comes to the coverage of this particular conflict from last 30 days in particular?
Thank you. I think the double standards and duplicity, hypocrisy of the Western media stands exposed as far as the coverage of the brutal attack of Israeli forces on Gaza. It's a small place, everybody knows Gaza Strip, and the destruction and death that has been unleashed on innocent people of this strip, Gaza, is unprecedented in the history of the world. You know, they have been bombing hospitals, they have been bombing schools, they have been bombing mosques, and everything they see on the ground on the pretext that the Hamas fighters are hiding it here. And that is the most unfortunate thing. And you know, the Western media, which claims to be the champion of objectivity and neutrality, they stand exposed because every event, the brutal events that we have witnessed unfolding before us, has been covered from a typical angle, and it's a pro-Israeli angle. And all the feed that they receive is through the Israeli media. And they haven't sent the people there on the ground to objectively report it. And we must not forget the fact that when it comes to the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, you know, they are talking of human rights, they are talking of the killing of innocent children, women, and old people by the Russian forces. But here, when the Israeli forces are basically destroying the buildings and the schools and the mosques and hospitals, they are keeping a silence. That is very criminal. I think it's a criminal on the part of the Western media not to show to the world as to what is happening there. Even when the missiles are being fired, the drones are being fired by the Israeli forces, they are termed as missiles and drones of Hamas. Is it possible that Hamas fighters will kill their own people, will kill Palestinians? Is it believable? Is it credible? No, it's not. So I think the world has seen in the last 30 days that you have mentioned during this war, the hypocrisy of the Western media as well as the hypocrisy of the Western leaders. You know, they are not condemned. And even those people who were basically trying to be objective in media, in the Western media, they have been sacked. And they have been asked to leave the channels and the newspapers. They have been threatened. So the hypocrisy is absolutely, can be visible, is visible, and it is exposed.
I'll come to you to understand what sort of tools the Western mainstream media has actually followed or adopted in order to continue with that very hypocrisy, portraying one-sided picture of the entire conflict. Dr. Amna, when we talk about the general public, of course, media has a huge impact because they have no other source of verification of what is happening on the ground. So they basically rely on the information which is being disseminated naturally by the mainstream media, and more so, majority of the people try to take that perspective what the Western media basically is trying to portray. Now it comes to the expert of international relations. As an expert has got more understanding, a deeper understanding of what is actually happening. Ideally, what sort of sources of information as an expert did you rely on, especially when it came to this particular conflict in the last 30 days?
Thank you, Jawad. Issue is very sensitive, and you are right that mainstream media, they are having their own mindset, their own reports. Actually, but we believe that they are following the policy of their governments. You see that almost all the Western governments except Ireland, they have declared their all sympathies towards Israel, and they asserted that Israeli right to defend itself. And the whole mainstream media is following that. But it is not right that the mainstream media is the only source of information for the people. You know, people are not trustworthy towards Western media. You see that the first report of CNN about the, beheaded 40 children, that was challenged immediately. And the lady who claimed that it was, she refused that she hadn't seen those people, and actually she was quoting some of the Israeli soldier. So I think that people are, you see that there is a hue and cry in all the Western world. There are big rallies in favor of Palestinian, people who are victim right now. And it means that they are following other sources. Now I come to your question that you say that what source we should rely on. I believe that there should be multiple sources to rely on, because one source is not authentic in this case. At this time, no mainstream media is giving true picture except Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera is the only channel that is showing both sides. But Al Jazeera is having a lot of pressure from all the Western worlds, and Qatar is also having where the Al Jazeera is located actually. So we can rely on Al Jazeera because they are showing everything happen there. But there are media blackouts in between. You see that power blackout, media blackout, and when they start their operation until the conclusion of especially the ground operation, the media coverage is not allowed. So we can also rely on social media, but that would be on your judgment that which is right and which is wrong, because the social media is hard to judge that which source is authentic or not. But in most of the cases, you see that Palestinian people are reporting about their own atrocities committed to them, and Hamas sources are, and Israeli sources are also admitting, and especially the people of Israel sitting in UK, they are also claiming this right, that these are the democracies and we are demanding safety for Palestinian, and our governments are not giving them. So what sort of democracies they are? So I think that right now it is hard to believe that who is right or not, but Al Jazeera is one source which is authentic.
Let me proceed towards Mr. Schlanger. Mr. Schlanger, you are sitting over there in Europe. Now, regarding this conflict over the last 30 days, what's your understanding and analysis how this particular conflict has been covered in various sections of media, from the Western mainstream media also to those alternative sources of media, as has been mentioned already by the panelists over here?
Well, let's start with the biggest control mechanism that they have, which is lying about the context of this whole situation. According to most Western media, it was the Hamas attack on October 7th which caused the problem. Well, there's at least a 75-year history preceding that, which is completely kept out of the media. The occupation, the heavy-handed, brutal attacks against ordinary Palestinians who were rebelling against the effects of the occupation over many, many years. And so by starting by saying that the whole thing is based on October 7th, they try to commit the populations of the West to this idea that, well, we have to support Israel because Israel was unjustly attacked. Now, then from there, you have the problems of the government, the United States government, Biden, Blinken, telling the press that, well, yes, it's terrible. We want humanitarian protection for the Palestinian civilians, but no ceasefire, and Israel has a right to do whatever it thinks is necessary to win this fight. Well, there's hypocrisy right there. How can you have humanitarian protection of civilians who have no army to defend them except Hamas, who are being bombed, who are being moved out of their homes, who are being told to go to areas where there's no safe haven? How can that be a humanitarian protection? And this is what Blinken ran into when he went to meet with King Abdullah, with Abbas and others, that they pointed out that the whole Western policy is hypocrisy. So I think just from understanding a little bit of history, it becomes clear that there's no objectivity. In fact, any Western press that tries to be objective is called anti-Semitic, because if you say that there's anything wrong with what Israel's doing or challenge that, they say you're anti-Semitic. And this is the way they try to intimidate press from digging deeper to find the real story. And finally, let me simply say that even with the attempts to shut down social media and shut down the internet, there are courageous people in Gaza and around the world who are getting out honest reporting on what's going on. And that's why we know some of this. And I think that's something that is one of the untold stories of heroes who, in their resistance, are making sure that the truth does get out to the West.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, you've highlighted some very important points. The first one, the right to self-defense, making a narrative on that and portraying that Israel was unjustifiably incurred by the Hamas so-called militants as per the narrative of the Israelis, and then trying to intimidate press by labeling them anti-Semitic, whoever tries to dig in deeper in order to get the real facts. Now, when there is intimidation on the part of authorities towards the press, the mainstream media, don't you think that reduces the credibility of the certain or the most credible media houses per se when they get intimidated because of that pressure by the authorities over there?
Well, if you're asking me, I think that the credibility of the governments of the West has been called into question by people. People are out in the streets. There were several million people in Western capitals, 200,000 or more in Washington, D.C., people marching in London, marching all over because they don't believe the governments. And they know that the media tells the lies the government feeds them. And so I think the question of who to trust and who to believe, outside of people who are inclined to accept the idea that Israel can do no wrong, and there are people like that, especially in the United States, the so-called Christian fundamentalists, and also anti-Palestinian racists. But most people have seen the disproportionate response from Israel and the numbers of deaths of children. And the question has been asked by some people in the media, how do you stop terrorism by killing innocent children and women? How do you stop a cycle of violence by escalating the violence? These questions are getting out there. And the ability of the governments and the media to control the narrative completely has been lost, partly because of social media and partly because people are so accustomed to being given false stories and disinformation and censorship that people go out and look and try to find the real answers. So I don't think they're going to be successful in controlling the story. The problem is they are successful in continuing the war. And if Mr. Blinken wants to have a humanitarian pause, stop sending arms. Tell the Israelis to stop shooting and killing women and children. And that's something that even someone who's not very intelligent can see. If the government isn't doing that, then they're lying to you when they say they're concerned about the humanitarian situation that's been thrust upon the Palestinians.
Right. Mr. Jawad, when we talk about the major tools, what major tools do you think, or the strategies or the different stages of misleading people or showing the one-sided picture this mainstream media has adopted in the last 30 days in particular?
I think they are totally relying on the Israeli government and their army, the Israeli army. Whatever they are telling them, they take it as a truth, and then they disseminate that version of so-called truth.
Do they even have a choice to challenge that? Because as
They
Mr.
do
Schlanger
have,
has mentioned, that they are intimidated by the authorities. So
Yeah,
do
I
they have
think,
that very window of trying to dig deeper into the real facts?
Yes, nobody tried to dig deeper into it, into this crisis, into this death and destruction. They were basically believing, and they were disseminating this information to the world, that Israel is innocent. It has been attacked by Palestinians, and the Palestinians are being dubbed as terrorists, whereas, in fact, Israeli army is the biggest terrorist army in the world. Some of the people in the West have clearly said, I'm talking of people, not the media, that Israeli army is resorting to the worst kind of terrorism in history by killing innocent children and attacking hospitals, attacking schools, attacking worship places like mosques. So I think people are watching it thanks to social media and thanks to other sources that the Western people are watching it. And some of the Western people in the United States and elsewhere, they have raised their concern and voice that why these innocent children are being killed. One of the candidates, the presidential candidate of the United States, I was listening to him, and he said that these children are as important as our children are, as the children of the United States are. So therefore, the world is watching in horror what's happening and how the terror is being unleashed on the innocent people of Palestine. Those who are fighting Israeli forces, yes, they are to be attacked, counter-attacked. But if somebody is sitting in his house or taking refuge in a camp, like they have attacked the camps also, the refugee camps in Palestine. So I think they're not sparing anyone, and this has provoked a reaction in the people of the Western countries. And as he was talking, our guest in Germany, that the people have, hundreds and thousands of people have come to the streets to protest it. And that is putting pressure on the governments as well as the Western media, that you are telling lies, that you are not reporting the facts objectively, and that you are totally biased. The world is seeing the destruction being carried out by the Israeli forces. So I think this whole theory of a Palestinian or Hamas being terrorists and being cruel and being callous has been exposed. And the world has seen with their own eyes, and they are witnessing every day that how the Israeli forces are killing innocent people. 5,000 children have been killed so far. This has never happened in the two world wars, First and Second World Wars. So, the European and the United States also should realize that this should not be allowed to continue. They are not, the United States is not agreeing for a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And that is why the death and destruction is going on. And the Western media is using the information that is being fed to them by Israeli forces. Nobody else. Al Jazeera was mentioned, but Al Jazeera's bureau was attacked, and many of the workers, Al Jazeera's journalists working in Gaza, they were killed. Some other journalists were also killed. So I think they are killing all these sources. They are eliminating all these sources which could have provided an objective reporting or an objective report from that area. So they are now basically twisting the facts, and they are trying to make the people believe that Israel is innocent, that Israel has been attacked, and whatever Israel is doing is in self-defense, which is not the truth.
Right. Let me bring in another participant in the show, Mr. Zahir Shah, Sherazi senior journalist, joining us on the phone line. Mr. Sherazi, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. So keeping objectivity as a major yardstick when it comes to the formulation of the narratives, shaping the public opinion or shaping the narratives, what are the major strategies or the steps the mainstream media does follow, keeping yardstick, the objectivity as a yardstick? And do you think this time around, when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict from the last 30 days, post 7th of October incursion by Hamas into Israeli territory, do you think the mainstream Western media has followed that yardstick?
Well, as our honorable guest was mentioning, perhaps this is not for the first time that the Western media is so biased when it comes to the narrative. And I would just say that perhaps in the Gaza Palestinian situation, the Western media is totally biased. Rather, we can say this is the lowest degree of degradation of journalistic ethics as well as professionalism, because we have all the time seen Israelis being propagated or promoted as victims of Hamas terrorism, but we haven't seen that how the Israeli forces are doing a genocide of the Palestinians, and especially the children, women, and all those non-combatants being killed. Perhaps this is not the first time, as we have in the past we had seen since 70s. The same narrative was built by most of these Western media, and now they are getting defamed among the Arab nationals and also the
I think, unfortunately, we've lost contact with Mr. Sherazi. Mr. Sherazi, can you hear me? Mr. Sherazi, can you hear me, please? I think, unfortunately, we've lost the contact with Mr. Sherazi. We'll try to reconnect him with him, and we'll resume whatever he had to say regarding whatever the agenda and the strategy the mainstream Western media was actually following in the last 30 days. Mr. Schlanger, when we talk about the Western media's role in covering the major conflicts in the world, historically, do you think there had been any similarities between its coverage when it came to specifically 9/11, and also we saw in the case of the allegations on the Iraqi regime having the weapons of mass destruction and launching that invasion on Iraq as well?
Well, I can tell you that the Western media has been committed to the ideas propagated by the war hawks long before 9/11. It goes back to the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin, the whole discussion of Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction, the lies about Libya that were used to generate a French, British, American attack and destruction of that country, the lies against the Assad government in Syria on chemical weapons. It's just the Western media is a part of a corporate cartel that's allied to the corporate cartels of the military-industrial complex. That's the whole point to it. And if you want evidence of that, here's something that you should look at. Everyone who knows something about Netanyahu knows that he's been in support of ethnic cleansing of Palestine his whole life. He believes in driving the Palestinians out of Palestine. He's been committed to that. He brags about sabotaging the Oslo process, the peace process of Rabin and Arafat. Now, what's interesting to me when we talk about the Western media, as corrupt as it is, one of the places where we're seeing somewhat honest coverage is an Israeli paper called Haaretz, which is the second or third largest paper in that country, which has been covering the fact that Netanyahu is launching this attack not just to go after the Palestinians and Hamas, but to protect himself from the legal charges against him. He tried to change the whole judicial system. And now we're seeing people coming into the streets in Israel who are somewhat angry at Netanyahu. Not somewhat, they're very angry at Netanyahu. They're blaming him for security lapses, but also for provoking a response to Israeli brutality. And so I think the situation is potentially going to change. My organization, the Schiller Institute, is working to get the truth out as much as possible. We have an international peace coalition, which includes 40 or 50 organizations, Catholic organizations, Muslim organizations, and now we're bringing in some Jewish organizations of Western Jews who don't like seeing Israel functioning the way the Nazis did in the Warsaw Ghetto. So I think we have a lot that we can talk about in the West to change the narrative, but until the governments change, they're going to continue to support the ethnic cleansing policies of the Netanyahu regime.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, if that be the case, which you have just mentioned, one of the leading media houses from within Israel mentioning about what are the main stakes of Benjamin Netanyahu. So there is definitely a need of creating an alternative narrative. If that is the case, if that is the reality, why do you think the US administration remains to be oblivious of that fact?
Well, I think Biden is in very big trouble. His whole Ukraine anti-Russia proxy war has collapsed. And it's clear now in even the Congress is unwilling to continue to spend money to prop up the Zelensky regime in Ukraine. And don't forget, we've been lied to repeatedly about how the Ukrainian counteroffensive was going to win, how the Russians were unprovoked. Just, again, the same pattern of lying. Now, Biden is staking his whole 2024 presidential election on being able to use the power of America as the world's sole superpower to maintain peace and stability. It's not working. Everything Biden is doing is increasing the danger to Americans and the danger to other countries that are allied with America. So I think they're going to continue to lie to try and protect themselves, but I don't think it's going to work. Biden's popularity among Democrats has dropped by 10% in the last 2 weeks. A 10% drop, that's pretty significant. He's now behind Trump in the polls virtually in all the major battleground states. So there's something that's going to happen quickly in the United States, and telling lies which are exposed by reality on the ground is not going to help keep Biden in office, nor is it going to provide stability and peace for Israel.
Right. I think we are rejoined by Mr. Zahir Sherazi on the phone line. Mr. Sherazi, are you with us? Can you hear me, please?
Yes, yes, I heard it on the line. Yes, please. Sorry for dropping the line.
So are there? Do you think this time around, if we take a historical perspective of the coverage by the mainstream Western media of the major conflicts and the major events happening historically, do you think they have learned any sort of lesson? And or should have learned some lesson from their past coverage of the major events or incidents, and they should have come up better this time around regarding the coverage of this conflict?
Well, I think the Western media had always been biased. They have their set agendas. When it was after the 9/11, when Al-Qaeda was being hunted in Afghanistan, if it's an Afghan war, it was in the Vietnam, even in Iraq. We have seen, as our honorable guest was mentioning, that all those weapons of mass destruction later proved to be wrong. Now, again, in the same case, in the Gaza conflict, how the Israelis had bombed the civilian population. They have killed thousands of children. And you have seen, even the U.S. president was saying that he had seen 40 babies being beheaded by the Hamas fighters. And even the top Western media channels like the Fox, the Independent, they also had that headline the next day, but they backtracked. And the reason, obviously, again, the U.S. administration also backtracked. Then there was an allegation which was very much propagated by the Israeli-American narrative that the Hamas fighters were raping the Israeli women, and that also turned out to be untrue. So the thing is how the media is controlled. This is the main thing, and this is a media war. You know, the hybrid regimes as well as the media strategic, whatever they wanted to do, they just plant and they pitch the ideas how the Western media is helping them out. But I think this is the lowest
Mr.
level.
Sherazi,
And
I seek your pardon. When it comes to controlling the media, do you think the social media or the internet has turned out to be an antidote against that particular?
I don't think so. It's possible to control. Since Arab Spring and all those happenings which happened around the world, there is only the social media which is like coming up with many of those facts. Because the mainstream Western media, apart from Al Jazeera and a couple of others, I think there is nothing being reported. For example, you have allowed the journalists to go there inside Israel, but the journalists are not allowed to go to Gaza and report. So again, you have one side of the story, which is the Israeli-American narrative. And obviously, it's not the Jewish narrative, as we have seen. People had come out on the roads, not only in Israel, but also all over the Western countries. And they are criticizing what the Israelis are doing. And this is, again, what the Western media is now realizing. And that is the reason among the Islamic and the Arab countries, there is a severe hate against the Western media. And also earlier we had been propagating this thing also, that most of the time the Western media proved to have to be biased when they were reporting in the Palestinian issue, when they were reporting the Afghan issue, they were reporting the Al-Qaeda issue. They have different standards. When it comes up to their own interest, I think they propagate one side of the story. But when it comes to the Muslim countries, perhaps I think they are very much biased towards the conflicts which are going on in the Muslim countries, as well as in the Ukraine case. We have seen most of the time the Western media has been showing a certain line, and it is because this Western media is controlled again by a lobby which propagates its own mindset and which goes with their own agendas.
Right. So when we talk about internet, there have been a number of blackouts over there in the Gaza post 7th of October incursion. Now, given the fact on one side the authorities try to control the mainstream media, and then when the world comes to know that what scale of atrocities is being perpetrated by Israeli regime on the innocent people in Gaza, so we see subsequent internet blackouts. So how the world would be aware after there being a control on mainstream media and then internet blackout? So what are the options left?
Now, whatever the measures what the Israeli government and the Israeli administration is taking, I think we have seen the protest. The people have started raising voices inside Israel. The Jewish people, perhaps who are opposed to the ideology of Zionism, they are against all this, whatever the Israel is doing. Again, the mainstream media is biased. It is towing that line which the Israeli or the American administration is pursuing. But again, the internet and the e-media, it is the form of media which is not in somebody's control. Yes, they are blocking. They are not allowing the people to go on those sites. The accounts are deleted, and even some of the journalists, the independent journalists who had been asking for objective reporting of the Gaza conflict, they are being fired. And we have seen, like, even the topmost media houses have removed and asked those journalists to set aside, or they are being removed, who are giving an objective point of view of the entire conflict. But again, you have seen the neutrality of the Western media when the Hamas leadership is brought in front in any of the talk shows. They're repeatedly being asked to one line that do they believe that Hamas had done an atrocity against the Israeli population, but they are not saying that how the Israeli bombs are doing the genocide of the innocent Palestinians. So this is the main difference. But again, I think in this such a blackout, again, the social media or the e-media is the only medium through which the Palestinians are putting up their genuine whatever is going on inside Israel. These atrocities are being communicated to the world through this social media.
Right, and Mr. Zahir Shah Sherazi, senior journalist, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Amna, now, on one side, the Western media being controlled by the authorities, then social media, internet blackouts. What other options do you think are left in the hands of innocent people of Gaza to tell to the world that what they've been facing over the last 30 days?
You were referring to the tools basically Western media is using. One, they are showing only one-sided coverage of Israel and what has been happened on 7th October, and after that they are quiet because they don't want to admit that Hamas is not there, and they don't want to admit that anybody can dare attack on them. Secondly, they are using very derogatory terms for a Palestinian, as just Mr. Zahir mentioned, that they are telling that first condemn that 7th October was a black day and the Hamas terrorists attacked. So the word the terrorist is loaded. And on the other hand, they are not using the same term for Israeli, soldiers attacking on civilian population, as Jawad Sadiq Saab referred number of times, schools, hospitals, particularly targeting. And the ammunition and bombs, they are using even more than the one.
The shelters or hospitals in particular, perhaps the Western media is terming those as being the Hamas tunnels, perhaps.
And even
that's how they are underground. The public.
And it is the credit of Hamas that they have saved the Israeli captive in those tunnels. They are not after tunnels. They are after the genocide of the people, so they should leave Gaza immediately. And you see that the people leaving there on their direction Gaza, they were attacked again and again. They are using this tool, and they are showing Palestinian figures as having guns in their hands and having on their caps written that they are against Israel. And they are using that this is the right of Israel to defend itself. While I have seen number of people saying that Israel is illegitimate and they are occupier nation, so they don't have right to defend, and that is first time exposed by the media. And as you were asking about the option is only social media and the people sitting there sending their videos appealing to the nations that please come to help. And Mr. Blinken, as he is there, he is not there to make a peace. He is not there to stop that genocide. He is just paying an eyewash that America is for, United States is for human rights and humanitarian pause. If it would have been the case in real sense, then he would not have been vetoed.
Perhaps for one side of the conflict.
Yeah.
Human rights perhaps for one side of the conflict. Primarily for them.
Primarily for Israel, not for any other nation of the world. As Mr. Schlanger mentioned, is Syria, Iraq, Vietnam, and then Afghanistan and
Don't
Libya.
you think ideally when we talk about the lessons, if the Western mainstream media was to learn some lessons, because this is the age of digital media, social media is so rampant, people are posting things are coming in real time, don't you think they should have shown a little bit of maturity of having grown up with the main trends globally? Especially with the advent of internet and social media.
Two basic factors, that media houses are all owned and controlled by a particular group, the Zionist group from United States and Western world. Secondly, you just listen that they are intimidated, they are targeted, and they are controlled officially by the. It would happen after 5 years when they would realize that there is no following, there is no recognition among the people, and as the people of Western world are showing that they are against this campaign, and who is responsible? United States and Israel, and the whole Western world standing with Israel. And I think that the only resort is social media, and another resort which is not that is out of sight, that the Muslim world and Muslim population should stand up in favor of the Muslims being slaughtered in Gaza.
Okay, Mr. Jawad, how effective do you think the alternative voices had been over the last 30 days in particular? And secondly, what options, given the fact of complete control on the Western mainstream media and then internet blackouts at the same time?
I think the Western media must realize that they are losing their credibility, whatever credibility they have, because by covering this whole tragedy from one angle, from one perspective, they are losing their credibility. And the people who have come on the streets, hundreds of thousands of people in various states of the United States, various cities of the United States, Germany, UK, France, and elsewhere, Indonesia, and elsewhere. They are coming on streets in such a big number, and they are protesting these brutal attacks against the innocent people in Gaza and elsewhere. So I think the Western media has realized that they have made a huge mistake, and they have committed a mistake, and they have lost the credibility. Right. And I think the social media and other forms of some media that is there and giving a realistic picture of what's happening there, and the world is witnessing.
So it's losing its credibility.
Yes.
But what about, does losing credibility is favorable to the Western mainstream media when it comes to serving its purpose? The purpose is being served at the end of the day. Perhaps losing credibility is of no importance for them.
Yeah, but I think the media itself, when they're losing the credibility and losing their viewers,
losing business,
and they will realize it that they have done a huge mistake. And I think this is a fact of life, that entire Western media, the Hollywood and the publishing houses in the US and elsewhere are owned by Jews. And that is why this one-sided propaganda is going on.
Right, Mr. Schlanger, losing credibility, is it good for them whether they lose their credibility, but whatever they are covering, the way they are covering it, it's at the end of the day, it serves their purpose perhaps?
Well, the ratings of the mainstream media in the United States are dropping. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, the TV networks, their ratings are dropping. But here's the important point. Who are they serving? They're not serving the interests of their readers or the people in their countries. The media is a cartel. There are about 6 families that control major media in the United States. They're tied to the same cartels that are selling the arms, Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. You've got interlocking corporate cartels. Now, it's important to note, what is their goal? It's not just to disorient the viewers in the West. their intention is to prevent an upsurge against the modern colonial system. And what we see in Palestine is a form of colonialism. But we're also seeing in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, nations standing up against the colonial powers. That's why the vote in the United Nations was so important, the General Assembly. 120 called for ceasefire and only 14 opposed it. That's because the rest of the world is standing up. And the reason they're going to continue to lie about Palestine and Israel is that they're trying to stop this anti-colonial movement from succeeding. And I don't think they can do it. And I think people will find some way to get the truth out. And it's incumbent upon us in the West and in the media to make sure that truth is magnified to overcome the narratives, the lying narratives coming from the mainstream.
Mr. Harley Schlanger, political analyst, joining us on Skype from Germany. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. In the studio, we were joined by Mr. Jawad Siddique, senior journalist, and Dr. Amna Mehmood, expert in international relations. Thank you very much for your time, both of you, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.